Okay, you can still hear me? Okay. So the acronym is where I left off, I think. TESOL is Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. So it is primarily a North American-based approach, which used to teach worldwide the English language. So around the 90s, 1994, Global TESOL College was founded in Canada. It's become the largest in the world, but at that was sort of a growing entity. It was established initially in the western part of Canada. And then as we started to place teachers worldwide, then it grew across most of the English speaking countries. So since 1994, we have graduated over 55,000 English teachers, and we have a very unique focused course of 120 hours, which basically is traditionally done with 60 hours in class and 60 hours online. The methodology that's primarily used in TESOL is what we call the communicative approach. So the communicative approach is that it basically uses communication as the foundation of how TESOL is presented. So a lot of traditional teachers have taught English focusing on grammar, focusing on storytelling, and you usually have the teacher as the deliverer and the student as the receptor receiving the knowledge. TESOL changed that. It made the student very interactive and made the student a part of the process. So we use techniques such as TPR, total physical response. So lots of movement, lots of clapping and singing, lots of engaging of the student. We believe that by creating the experiences, it will lead to the knowledge. So I do an activity with you. I teach you 4 new vocabulary words. We do some movement around the room, some clapping and singing, reinforcing those 4 words. And the students will remember what those 4 words are because they will remember the dance and the activity that led to that knowledge, to that retention. So using this approach, it changes the role of a student, no longer just being the receptor, but being very much a participant in the whole process. So the teacher moves around, leads, engages, one-on-one, small groups, interaction, lots of energy in the room. And it basically comes back then to what are the foundations of TESOL teaching and the philosophy of teaching and the pedagogy of teaching. And basically, it is engaging the student, making it an interactive process in the classroom so that we create experiences that lead to the knowledge. Thus, the approaches, which is TPR, including an approach called the dynamic approach, which was started primarily by Dr. John Rassius in the USA, who established the Rassius Center, which you may have heard of, or you can Google and see. And it deals very interactively with teacher training, with the idea that we don't lecture, we engage. The philosophy being that if we teach a class for 1 hour, each student in the class will have had an opportunity to speak 65 times in that hour. 65 times. So that would mean they engage together, sometimes some individual checking in the room, having them participate, but oftentimes it's group dynamics. The opportunity that the student practices 65 times an hour is the theory, is the way of learning. It's very difficult for a student to learn English or indeed any other language if the teacher is doing all the talking. So if the teacher is constantly talking in the old lecture approach, well, then the student doesn't really have a chance to engage and participate very much. And this is what makes the action and activity so exciting from day one, where the student knows nothing in the beginner stage, and the teacher begins with a game like the hot potato. I take a ball and I throw it to the student, and I say the student's name, and he or she repeats the name and throws the hot potato, the ball back at me. And then I throw it to another student, and then I have them toss it to the next student, and at the same time, they're saying their names. Subliminally, it also builds confidence. Language is confidence, and language is rhythm. We just don't learn language, as you know, just by teaching vocabulary. We have to speak it to a rhythm So we engage in dancing and movement to help them become. In fact, some people walk by an English class and say, "This is a class? It looks like there's a party going on in the room." But it's a very controlled kind of atmosphere where the teacher is in charge, but not always in the face of the student. And that's a defining difference between the role of the two. So the teacher and student assessment has to do with the different proficiency levels that they achieve along the way. There's specific benchmarks, number of words, number of phrases put together, short sentences, themes. All of this leads to different benchmarks along the way, which mark the learning in a very positive manner. At the same time, as the student expresses themselves more verbally, then a little bit of the written work begins. So that instead of beginning with the written work and then the verbal follows, it's the other way around. Because we like to know, for example, how we order dinner in a restaurant before we write a paragraph on the different types of food or the way the menu looks. So as part of the lesson planning and the teaching strategies, we teach this in the TESOL program. How to have a balanced lesson plan where the student is engaged, beginning with a warm-up, which could be movement, could be a song, traditionally called an icebreaker. Every class begins with this icebreaker, so it's a fun activity. How many children do not want to play games? Very few. How many children don't want to have fun? Very few. So the preset for excellent learning is already there, including with adults. Adults are just big children, and we all want to play. We all want to have fun, and we all are very self-conscious, especially when it comes to language learning. Thus, the approach reduces the anxiety, builds the self-confidence, interacts the student, and before they know it, language acquisition takes place. We teach about classroom management, how to engage these students, and the different types of strategies to meet their different needs. And we teach the traditional, of course, the traditional key components of language learning: listening, speaking, reading, writing being literacy skills. And we use the arts, music, drama, dance, and movement as very much a congruent part of this program. So consequently, they learn vocabulary, and they learn vocabulary to utilize the vocabulary in their activity, not because they have to memorize. It's not a memorization activity where it's a drill, drill, drill. It's a different motivational approach. Then we have pronunciation, including phonetics, which is very important in English language. And along the way, they learn how to spell the word, even though that's not the primary importance. As they move up in the levels, they do have to learn how to write. There are realities in writing for admission to universities, to pass a TOEFL exam, to pass an IELTS exam. So eventually it moves to this, but it's much easier to do when there's a love of the language already established. It doesn't feel like there's learning, it feels like there's a lot of engagement, and that leads to the learning, which is a joyful learning. Even grammar becomes interesting to learn. But we teach the grammar as it applies to a particular class, to a particular activity. Not that we make a formal announcement and say, today we're going to teach about adjectives, because basically, who cares? But if we're using an expression and the adjective is not pronounced correctly, or a student wonders, what is this word in here that describes something? Then we explain what that is so that it becomes interrelated to the communication approach to the lesson. So very practical, very engaging. And so tools, warm-ups, games, movement, music, lots of videos. One of my favorite activities was always to take a movie. And I used to take a Hollywood movie in a high school class. And I would show a movie up to the point where there's a high drama point. So let's say the movie's about an hour and a half. Usually traditional American movies have it peaking around 40 minutes, the greatest excitement. I stopped the movie right at the moment of greatest excitement. And then I asked the high school class, write the next 2 minutes of the script. What do you think happens in the next 2 minutes? And they write so many interesting scripts. And then I'll show the video the way Hollywood has it going on. Sometimes the students will say, my script, meaning theirs, is better than the Hollywood movie. And I think that's great when they can say that. So along the way, another example, that they're just not sitting back and watching, but they're very much a part of the process. Global TESOL created e-learning, a lot of online learning using what we call specializations. So you have this foundation course that we normally do over 5 days, and then you have these specializations that are done online. Now, specializations in the university world are called electives, but we call them specializations. It's a special certificate that they get. And in fact, in our training, they get 3 certificates. So the first one that they get all at the end, of course, because without the completion, there's no certification. So the first certificate is based on the in-class course, which is called the Foundation, also available entirely online. Secondly, we have these elective specializations, and they get a certificate for that. And then third, the granddaddy of them all, they receive the 120-hour certificate, which for teaching overseas is what the embassies and the governments issue their working visas and visas of participation based on the fact that, if they call them in China, they are foreign experts. And these foreign experts get that expertise status by the fact that they've had this TESOL training. So specializations. You might be interested in teaching teenagers. So we have one called Teaching Adolescents English. Perhaps your focus is more on teaching business and using business terminology. So that's why we have the Teaching Business English. And then we have terminology such as teaching tourism English. So people perhaps who want to teach in the tourism industry. You know, tour guides in Europe all have to have a license to be a tour guide, and in many parts of the world. And part of the requirement is to have English language knowledge. Same as English is the knowledge of the aviation system. So to be able to work in the aviation system on any level, as an operator in a travel agency, front desk in a hotel, in sort of in the receiving line of the airport check-in, right to the pilots, to the flight attendants, English is the language of aviation. So we have tourism English. And we have there's 16 in total, easy to see. And they are required, every student is required to be able to have the specialization in addition to the foundation. Foundation plus specialization equals 120-hour TESOL training certificate. These foundation in class or online, but mostly done in class. The specialization only online, and then the certification, we get them into jobs. So the kinds of jobs that they get, many go to teach in Asia because that's a great money machine. So we've taught this course in the Russian Federation. I've taught it 3 times, I think, in the Russian Federation, in Moscow, in Sochi, in St. Petersburg. And the graduates from these courses are English teachers, and they go and they work in China. So they come from the pay level that they're at, and you know what it is, and they end up making $1,500, $2,000 a month, but they get a free apartment. They can teach extra because they only work 25 hours a week, and many do. They do a lot of tutoring, and they get their airfare reimbursed, with most contracts being 10 months in length. So you've got majority of contracts that are concurrent to the school year. Some go for 1 semester. People from university, for example, want to take a gap year, or maybe just want to take a gap half year. So then they're positioned in a job where they can do that. Others, including teachers, are only available to work in the summer. So depending on the criteria, under a certain age, they can work in summer camps, which are language camps, in Italy, in France, in Spain, in Brazil, in China. And we are now offering English language camps in Canada for students and teachers in the summer. And then some of the teachers we will bring in from other countries of the world where they're teaching English to be able to have them also involved in our summer training. Most of the jobs teaching overseas will include accommodation, and most of the accommodation is a private apartment. Teachers can also bring their spouse, their close friend. They sometimes get visas also for their children. Depending on the situation, they can bring their family. They're not necessarily expected to go alone, but it is a great adventure. So we use $1,500 a month US as kind of a benchmark. Some jobs pay more. I know one job I placed 3 people in yesterday in Shanghai, China, pays 3,000 US dollars and gives them the apartment and I think it was 22 hours of teaching. All of these contracts include medical insurance, hospital insurance, accident insurance, And they include bonuses, and they also include the opportunity to be able to renew the contract. Many do. I've had many stories where people say, "Oh, I'll go to China for 1 year." 3 years later, they're still there. They can come home when they want, like over holidays, and then they return back to the job. Every year there's a pay increase, and every year there's a retention bonus at the end of the year. The types of schools and places teachers can teach in are traditional public schools. So we have public school placements, government schools, standard 9 to 3 every day, Monday to Friday, no weekends, typical standard format. No bonuses because the pay is the pay. Then we have language schools. And in language schools, there's bonus based on retention. There's bonus based on new recruitments. Language schools are a business, but they focus a lot on specialization on language. And you have some major ones in the world. EF is in the Russian Federation as well. They're everywhere. English first. In Shanghai, they have an office building there of 600 people, and they hire people strictly for the teaching in their language schools. And there's many others. Then we also have international schools where people are placed there for the teaching of English. So the opportunities, I'm getting to wind up now, the opportunities are considerable in the world, and the opportunities are there. There never seems to be a saturation point. We seem to always have between 8 and 14,000 jobs available to suit different types of approaches, including teaching in university and including doing special workshops and teacher training. And that's it, I think, Boris. Subject to any questions you or anyone in the audience may have, I think I sort of presented an overview. I'm sorry if I have to go quickly, but we're all limited by time. All good? Oh, no problem. A pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Have a really good night.